Hello everyone, thanks for coming and joining me for this second video for Heritage for All initiative. I hope you're going to be really excited about the topic we're going to discuss today, which is about museum displays. My presentation today is titled How to Make Museum Lively Spaces, Exhibits in Context, Theatricality Approaches to Displays. Before starting, I recommend you to read my previous article that was published recently on Heritage for All page called How to Exhibit Deceptively. How to make museum lively spaces and why. I would like to talk to you about four important themes here. The exhibition, first, as an influential media. Second, the extreme importance of context. 3, the power of scenography in exhibitions. And finally, the importance of multisensory impact that displays can have on you. The term exhibition in French refers to the act of exhibiting, as well as all that is exposed and the place where one exhibits. It comes from the Latin word expositio, which means explanation, exposed, and had the general meaning of presentation. In contemporary times, we speak of exhibition as the setting of exhibits. It is a container and a content, but it's also defined by its users, the visitor and the staff, the people who participate in the general experience inside the exhibition space. Exhibiting is a main function of the museum. It is an explanatory visualization of the fact by means of objects, the means of staging used as a sign, says CeRAP in 2003. The elements of scenography, showcase, chair rails, etc. all serves as a separation between the real world and the imaginary world of the museum, guaranteeing a distance that shows that we are in another world, that of artifice and imagination, as specified elsewhere in Bertolt Brecht's theater, but still allows us to get up close to the world of the display. The exhibition includes musealized objects, called musealias, real things, and also substitutes, casts, copies, photos, material of displays, presentation tools, showcases, partitions, information tools, text, film, multimedia, signaling, and more. The exhibition functions as a communication system. It's not a question of reconstituting the reality, but of communicating through a device. The mediation in museums will, through various interventions, build bridges between what is exposed and the meaning of objects. The institutional interest for the exhibition materialized under the incitement of Christian Carrière in France, especially with the creation of the association called Expomedia, which brought together sociologists, psychologists, historian of art, semiologist, linguistic, philosopher, around the knowledge of the exhibition. The aim was to make the exhibition a non-traditional object of study and research by focusing on it peripherally and by working on case studies on works of art, institutions, audiences, and influence on said things through the exhibition. In this new setting, which emerged in the late 60s, the exhibition is addressed as a device that generates meaning for the visitors. The study of the exhibition should explore, as other medias already do, different elements. Firstly, the institution, which produces the exhibition. Secondly, its technical dimension, who builds it and in what way. Thirdly, its destination via a study of the public, for whom it is intended, which audience it touches. And finally, to understand its communicative dimension, what effects the exhibition have on the public. From these four references, it is possible to understand the exhibition as a media. Therefore, the museum is no longer studied only from the point of view of the collection or works of art, but from the public perspective. This approach was built from the meeting of the world of research and professionals from museums and exhibitions. Various research projects have been carried by museums such as the Centre Georges Pompidou, the Future City of Science and Industry, with the support of the Ministry of Culture, notably through the mission of research technology to which other entities will be joined, such as the Ministry of Higher Education and Research via the Directorate of Libraries, Museums and Scientific and Technical Information in France. New forms of exhibitions then appeared in the field of institutions, particularly through documentary-type exhibitions, combining subject presentation and knowledge mediation. This context has contributed to the rise of museology in France, based on the conception of research and the objectives of heritage and museum institutions that allow for exchange and cooperation, highlighting from a museological point of view the importance of action towards audiences such as exhibitions, publishing, mediation, or educational activities. Any exhibition is the result of a choice, a sampling, a composition of objects in a space, the scenography inherited from the world of theater, which allows to draw the scene of the museum via the architecture of the place and arrangement of objects, creating a participatory dynamic of significance focused on the visitor and thus making the exhibition a communication device. Museum architecture is defined as the art of designing and developing or constructing a space to house the museum's specific functions, exhibitions, preventive and active conservation, study, management, and reception. At the beginning of the 20th century, we became aware of the need to reduce permanent exhibitions to accommodate storage space, including by removing exhibition halls. It was also a question of making the museum environments by eliminating the existing historical decorations. In the second half of the 20th century, other architectural modification in museums came as a result of the multiplication of temporary exhibition in order to allow a different distribution of the collections between the permanent ones and those in storage, but also for the development of the lobby, restroom, bookstores, restaurant, and shops. The museum architecture can be defined by all the aforementioned elements related to the space, but there's another element that plays a major role in the display: light. Light offers better visibility, a sense of chronology, and allows for much more artistic creativeness without changing the architecture in itself. The term museography first appeared in the 18th century, before museology, but it's defined as the practical part of museology. The set of techniques developed to fulfill the museum functions, such as museums layout, conservation, restoration, security, and exhibitions. In France, for some years now, the term expography has been used to describe the technique related to the exhibitions that are applied in the context of the museum or in an area outside it. Museography can be distinguished from scenography, which designates all the techniques of spatial planning, even though there is scenography or architecture in the museography. The terms are sometimes confused, showing the museum's proximity to other disciplines, such as theater. The presence of theater and opera scenographer in major exhibitions in the world, such as Patrice Chéreau in France, Robert Carson in Canada, or Robert Wilson in USA, show that theater has strongly influenced the museum world over the last 30 years in a recurring manner. I refer you to the study that I have made on this subject for my master's degree at the Sorbonne University, titled "Is Art Under Influence? Theatricality at Work in the Museum Exhibition, Spotlight on Theater and Opera Directors and Scenographers from 1986 to 2015. The elements mentioned above allow the exhibition of communication systems, including theory and museological practices, coupled with theater-based resources such as dramaturgical narratives and theatricality, in order to reinforce the staging of the context, to propose a dynamic, engaging, and interactive mediation. This is even more important when the museum displays non-European arts. For ancient America, the initiation to pre-Hispanic art should be the subject of a museology reorientated toward the resources of theatricality, towards the capacity of the context to restore the primitive realities in which the universe of the gods and hierophanies are essential. Ecological unity from Georges-Henri Rivière, or period rooms, could be an inspiration to recreate a lively scenography in motion, more in phase with the object exposed and their space and time. The museographic method used to influence behavior have been known for a long time. Herbert Bayer, artist from the Bauhaus, in the exhibition of Construction Workers' Union in Berlin in 1931, adapts his conception of scenography for propaganda purposes. One can induce a behavior through the modeling of a course by the color of the walls and the cartels, by the graphic signs on the walls and on the ground. The stripping of the museum in the white cube style brings back the commercial model of the art gallery, challenged by the scenographic movement of the 60s, expressed in the exhibition like Dilabi Dynamic Labyrinth. The neutral space, dressed with artificial lights or colorful picture rails, erases the context, disrupts the truth of the works to invent a new identity. This is the process of museology. From then on, the spatial temporal landmarks come into tension with the visitors. The lights on the objects aestheticize but do not tell. Continuous neutrality in museography is a form of clinical aesthetic, a symbolic imputation and extraction of their original space-time. The exponential vogue, it should be noted, is actually in the standardizing mode. All the arts of the world housed under the same sign, a modernist model. The modernist standardizer exposes objects in clinical spaces where the roots and genetics of work from extra-European cultures are systematically mutilated and sequestrated in shop windows. Because for the museum it is a question of integrating or assimilating all these cultures' diversities into a sort of neutral global unity without their contextual specificity in a museography of globalization. The Pavillon des Sessions at the Louvre Quai Branly Jacques Chirac Antenna, inaugurated in 2000, designed by Jean-Michel Wilmotte, reflects this modernist style whose aesthetic contours are defined by the former collector who died many years ago, Jacques Carchach, confirming an aesthetic used by museums worldwide for pre-Hispanic arts, better adapted to the art market than to its traditional and spiritual origins. There is a problem that has presided over the constitution of European museums since as early as the 18th century, and which still prevails in our time: the uprooting of objects from their birthplace and their context. To divide is to destroy, said the thinker Quatremer de Quincy, directed toward the Encyclopedic Enlightenment Museum. Follower of Johann Winkelmann, whom he considered the founder of archaeological science, Quatremer favored archaeology and history as vectors for a deep regeneration of the arts. Quatremer favored archaeology and history as vector for a deep regeneration for the arts. Here, dans les lettres à Miranda, he wrote, "Stop bragging about the orders and the arrangement that prevails in this workshop of demolitions. To what sad destiny do you condemn the arts if their products are not longer to be found to any of the needs of society? If so-called philosophical system close to them all the careers of the imagination, deprive them of all the jobs that they were prepared for? The religious beliefs, the mild social affections, the consummate consolations of human vanity. Do not tell us that these works of art are preserved in these deposits. Yes, you have transported matter, but have you transported with them that procession of tender, deep, melancholy, sublime, or touching sensations that surrounded them? All these objects have lost their effect by losing their motive. The merit of the greatest number was due to the beliefs which gave them being, to the ideas with which they were connected, to the accessory which explained them, to the connection of thoughts which gave them of the whole. To move all the monuments, thus to collect the fragments, to break up the fragments, to methodically classify the remain, to make of such a meeting a practical course of modern chronology. It is during its lifetime to attend its funeral. It is to kill art to make history. It is not to make history, but the epitaph. The evolution of the exhibition scenography between the end of the 19th century and the 20th went through a stripping of spaces echoing the renewal of the museography of major museums. In the years 1920s to 1930s, the discipline is paralleled by the theatrical experimentation of the European avant-garde, in particular by the Russian artist L. Lissinsky, and the innovative prompt spaces, for whom the experience of the visit should include the spectator as part of the exhibition, so that the visitor would receive the influence from the objects on a subconscious level. The mutations that have contributed to the evolution of museum scenography are the products of multiple influences, both political and economic, social and cultural, but also of the interactions between the different disciplines, in particular the ones between museology, the arts of shows, and theaters. Today, the advent of new technologies combined with the age of the internet and social networks, as well as the development of new type of media, is constantly influencing museums and their museological methods to attract people and to adjust to public demand. The museological strategy, whose scenography forms the practical application, is revealed as a key element for the museum's renewal. The scenography builds a fictional space in the heart of the museum. Developed from a narrative, a synopsis that modifies the visit. From passive, as it had been in the past, the visit becomes active since it starts with the movements of the viewer through the narrative within the display. Inspired by dramaturgy, the storyline is often divided into three large sections, three major themes, that is, each with its own sub-themes, including an introduction, a development, and an end, the conclusion. The rooms of the exhibition are now designed as sets with specific furniture according to the relevant subject, such as chair rails with different colors, architectural structures, textures and lighting effect, dramatization of lights and sounds. All this aiming to create splinters via narrative sequences, rhythms and different tempos specific to the exhibition, chronologies and comparative and interpretative phases, allowing the visitor to make the connection between the different objects without even notice doing it. The role of the visitor has definitely changed through these narratives, structures and system because they are functioning like a program centered on her or him. The content is set up in steps that the public is taking themselves, activating the display as they go along, with each new room conveying the next scene of the story directly into the spectator's unsuspecting subconscious mind. The semantics, the speech acts, the marketing of images are all elements that unveil the exhibition's real intentions. From the poster to the tour, the scenography always communicates a cultural and/or political purpose, a demonstration of power. The collection spreads prestigious cultural models to the public, cultural models whose museological tendencies are equivalent everywhere in the world, and it's valid for every culture at any moment, in any time, and in the same way for every civilization. For example, it is not uncommon to find a pre-Hispanic mummy close to an Egyptian one, from different periods no less, showcased in a dark and mysterious display, because the determinant factor in this particular type of museology is the general theme rather than the value of the culture itself, like its own value and what it signifies in its own context and history. Today that is fashionable with the museology concerning extra-European art, like a trend, following the tendency to globalize cultural diversities in exhibition through neutral scenographies, white cubes, fashion styles, that ends up robbing them of their true worth, rather than explaining what they really are, which leads to fake or misleading narrative that serves the multiple agendas, global art market, cultural, economic, and political purposes, or even soft power techniques to influence public opinion. This newly created and erroneous narrative is adopted as factual truth by the institution itself, a truth that holds no legitimacy other than what the museum fabricates with another untold purpose, which is keeping the extra-European cultures colonized within the museum through these staged and crooked displays. There are many scenic aesthetics for each of the different types of exhibition and museums, but the principle remains the same: to produce emotion inside the visitor's mind, to provide an aesthetic pleasure and experience of the exhibition rather than an unengaged visit. Studies in communication have shown the very prominent role of emotions in the process of learning and memorizing information. Also, to move is to engage the visitor, to involve him, her, in the experience of the exhibition. Museum marketing develops strategy through regular renewal of exhibitions, playing with the surprise effect, to maintain the interest of the visitor through interactivity and the playful aspect of the scenography. Whether of the grandiose or abstract, modernist or clinical gallery type, the scenography is a symbolic narrative that doubles the official purpose of the exhibition. The scenography diffuses a symbolic ensemble as much as the object showcased. For Peter Brook, even an empty space and the movement of an individual is already a theatrical act, because there is an action effect that produces something, a multi-sensory influence on the viewer. For Micaela M, la hierophanie, the eruption of the sacred in the profane world, is constitutive of the spirit of ancient cultures that produced those objects that are today exhibited in our museums without their primordial reality. They have lost all their true purpose and meaning because the museums that welcome them erase their original context and identity. The pre-Hispanic exhibitions have nothing to do with contextuality or history anymore, but with performance and performativity. A new type of scenography that includes theatricality would be better adapted to express the ancient arts of America with all their potentials in terms of sacred and of divinity. For Jacquenat, elevating an ethnographic object as a masterpiece is tantamount to affirming the imperialism of the Western gaze, relieved of its original functions, be they ritual, religious, social, or symbolic. The object is reduced to its aesthetic dimension in an abstract setting created from norms and taste of our culture. Pre-Hispanic art is too complex and cannot be shown through a modern aesthetic or white cube scenography because it is immensely sacred and connected to the world of the divine. It is the result of the transcription of symbolic elements essentially derived from divinities and whose understanding by the general public can only be realized in the light of deciphering its codes. To the pre-Hispanic people, all objects are divine in essence, a manifestation of a balance between two realities, one tangible and the other intelligible, says the professor and archaeologist Daniel Levin from the Sorbonne University. By dissecting the sets of objects, dissociating the collections while annihilating the networks of relations, or by trading the context with fiction through the prism of Western references, this museological anatomism presents a deeply profaned and fermented pre-Hispanic corporality to the public. An important discovery was made in the early 90s by a team of Italian researchers led by Giacomo Rizzolatti, where it was found that the mirror neurons that show how the recognition of others, their actions, even their intentions, depend in the first instance on our motor heritage. The neurons that activate in the brain are the same when an action is performed by oneself or when it's observed in another. This is a natural integrated simulation that allows the viewer to use his/her own resources to experience the world of others through a direct, automatic, and unconscious simulation process. The impossible movement, shapes, and form visible on some sculptures activate another area of the brain dedicated to the conflict resolution. Imagine the challenge of deciphering and understanding an Aztec monolith of Coatlicue seen out of context in neutral museums with our logical brain. The neurophysiologist Alain Bertos takes the perception of space and the change of viewpoint into account and argues that to change one's point of view is to change the spatial reference and enhance the perspective and to occupy the point of view of the other. It is the ability to move from an egocentric repository to an allocated referential. According to Jean-Pierre Changeux in Raison et Plaisir, the frontal cortex marks the unfolding of a sequence of representations of affective points of reference and contributes to the faculty of awakening of the painting. The spectator projects his mental states onto the work being looked at, giving them a symbolic meaning. Vittorio Gallese and David Friedberg, in the article entitled Motion, Emotion, and Empathy Experience from 2007, argue that the aesthetic reaction created from images of everyday life or work of art activates groups of bodily mechanisms responsible for actions, emotions, and other corporeal sensation. Seeing art is living it. Emotion can facilitate many cognitive mechanisms such as perception, attention, memory, decision-making, or moral judgment. In order for the positive effects of emotion to benefit the exhibition, it is better to make what is directly relevant to the speeches emotional. Otherwise, the process may become counterproductive. The brain handles challenges more easily if it is integrated in a singular context and allows a better encoding in the memory. Some studies suggest that this consolidation step benefits more emotional events than neutral events, allowing a greater selection of information to be retained. To trigger interest in a museum element, we must increase 3 variables at once: the novelty, originality of the element, its complexity, and its understanding. Pre-Hispanic art poses a double constraint to the museum: religious or secular, sacred objects or everyday objects. It does not seek aesthetic effects or displays in the secular sense. To take a pre-Hispanic approach to the contemporary museology would require the difficult exercise of restoring as a sine qua non condition the multiple artistic and cultural expressions in their original context against museum abstraction, foe of cultural diversities. The idea was initiated by Quatremer de Quincy in the 19th century, opposing the French Revolutionary Museum against the fundamental freedom of peoples. Even if the problematics of contextualization are not new, it must not stop in interest of the new museological action as a process of liberations of dogmas and recitatives and standardized and hegemonic practices. Without this, the pre-Hispanic museology is an additional maneuver of cultural alienation and imposture legitimized through the institution and institutional facts through the media, exhibition, and its displays. The revival of the period rooms is very popular in major museums displaying European art like the Louvre. Can we also hope that in the near future, this museography will be the leading line for the pre-Hispanic arts as well, giving their true meaning back? Thanks for watching.